The idea that Linux is going through a Phase 2 revolution might sound dramatic at first. But when you look closely at what's been happening over the past few years, it starts to feel less like hype and more like a quiet shift that's finally becoming impossible to ignore. For a long time, Linux was seen as the operating system of enthusiasts, developers, and server admins, something powerful but niche, flexible but intimidating, and most importantly, something that lived in the shadow of mainstream platforms like Windows and macOS. That was Phase 1 of the Linux revolution, the slow and steady groundwork where Linux proved itself in servers, infrastructure, cloud computing, and embedded systems. It was the phase where Linux became the backbone of the internet, powering everything from web servers to Android devices, but it did so largely behind the scenes, invisible to everyday users. Now what's happening feels fundamentally different. This new phase isn't about proving Linux is capable. That battle was already won. This is about Linux stepping out of the background and becoming a serious contender in the consumer space, in productivity, gaming, content creation, and even enterprise desktops. The difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2 is visibility, accessibility, and momentum. Linux is no longer just the system that runs your favorite websites. It's increasingly becoming a system you might actually choose to run on your own machine without feeling like you're making a compromise. One of the biggest catalysts for this shift has been the transformation of the user experience. Historically, one of Linux's biggest weaknesses was fragmentation and inconsistency. There were too many distributions, too many desktop environments, too many package managers, and too many ways to do the same thing. For newcomers, this wasn't freedom, it was confusion. But now distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, and newer players like Pop! _OS and Endeavour OS have matured to a point where the out-of-the-box experience is polished, coherent, and increasingly comparable to proprietary systems. Installations are faster, hardware compatibility is better, and the overall experience feels less like assembling a toolkit and more like using a finished product. Another key factor in this so-called Phase 2 is the massive improvement in hardware support. There was a time when running Linux on a laptop meant dealing with broken Wi-Fi, non-functional trackpads, or missing GPU drivers. That era is fading quickly, thanks to better kernel development, stronger collaboration between hardware vendors and the open-source community, and initiatives like the Linux Vendor Firmware Service. Modern Linux systems are far more plug-and-play than they used to be. Companies like AMD have embraced open drivers, Intel continues to support Linux robustly, and even NVIDIA, historically one of the more difficult players, has started to make moves toward better compatibility and openness. Gaming, perhaps unexpectedly, has become one of the most important battlegrounds in this transition. For years, gaming was the ultimate deal-breaker for Linux adoption on the desktop. If you couldn't play the latest titles easily, Linux simply wasn't an option for most users. But then came Proton, Valve's compatibility layer built on Wine, and everything began to change. Suddenly, thousands of Windows games became playable on Linux with minimal effort. The Steam Deck, running a Linux-based OS, proved that not only is Linux viable for gaming, but it can actually deliver a seamless and compelling experience to mainstream users. This wasn't just a technical milestone, it was a perception shift. Linux was no longer not for gaming. It was now part of the gaming conversation. Beyond gaming, software availability has improved dramatically. While it's still true that some industry-standard applications, particularly in fields like video editing, graphic design, and enterprise software, remain tied to Windows or macOS, the gap is closing. Open-source alternatives have become more powerful and user-friendly, and many proprietary applications are moving toward web-based or cross-platform models. Tools like Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage have simplified software distribution, making it easier for developers to target Linux without worrying about fragmentation. This doesn't completely eliminate the problem, but it reduces friction significantly, which is often the difference between adoption and abandonment. Cloud computing and containerization have also played a huge role in pushing Linux into Phase 2. Technologies like Docker and Kubernetes, both deeply rooted in Linux, have reshaped how software is built, deployed, and scaled. Developers are now more comfortable with Linux environments than ever before, even if they're working on Windows or macOS machines. This familiarity trickles down into personal usage. When developers realize they're already living in a Linux world professionally, the idea of using Linux on their personal machines becomes less intimidating and more logical. There's also a cultural shift happening in parallel. Privacy concerns, data ownership, and distrust of large tech companies are becoming more mainstream topics. Linux, by its very nature, offers a level of transparency and control that proprietary systems simply can't match. You can inspect the code, modify it, and run your system without being tied to a company's ecosystem or data collection practices. This doesn't mean Linux is automatically the best choice for everyone, but it does mean it's becoming more appealing to a broader audience that values control and independence. At the same time, it's important not to overstate the situation. Linux is not about to replace Windows or macOS overnight, and anyone claiming that is ignoring the complexity of the ecosystem. There are still real challenges. Software compatibility, especially for specialized professional tools, remains an issue. Fragmentation, while improved, hasn't disappeared. Support and documentation can vary widely depending on the distribution and community. And for many users, especially those who are not technically inclined, the familiarity and convenience of existing systems still outweigh the benefits of switching. What makes Phase 2 interesting isn't that Linux has suddenly become perfect, it's that the trade-offs are shrinking. In the past, choosing Linux often meant sacrificing convenience for control or compatibility for freedom. Now, those sacrifices are becoming smaller, sometimes even negligible depending on the use case. For a growing number of users, Linux is no longer the alternative choice. It's a viable primary option. Another sign that we've entered this new phase is the increasing involvement of major corporations. Microsoft, once famously hostile toward Linux, now actively contributes to the Linux kernel and supports Linux through initiatives like the Windows subsystem for Linux. Google relies heavily on Linux for its infrastructure and has built entire ecosystems on top of it. Even companies like Valve are investing heavily in Linux as a strategic platform. This corporate involvement doesn't mean Linux is losing its open source identity. Rather, it shows that Linux has become too important to ignore. Education is another area where Linux is quietly gaining ground. Schools, universities, and training programs are increasingly incorporating Linux into their curricula, not just as a niche skill, but as a fundamental part of modern computing. This creates a new generation of users who are comfortable with Linux from the start, rather than seeing it as something foreign or intimidating. Over time, this could have a compounding effect, gradually increasing adoption in both personal and professional contexts. If Phase 1 was about building the foundation, Phase 2 is about expanding the reach. It's about taking everything that made Linux strong in the background and bringing it to the foreground in a way that's accessible and appealing. It's about turning a powerful but fragmented ecosystem into something more cohesive without losing the flexibility that makes it unique. And it's about changing perceptions, showing that Linux isn't just for a specific type of user, but can be for anyone willing to try something different. There's also an interesting psychological element to this shift. For years, Linux users often had to justify their choice, explaining why they were willing to deal with certain inconveniences in exchange for the benefits. Now that narrative is starting to flip. More people are asking why they should stay on systems that limit their control, collect their data, or lock them into specific ecosystems. This doesn't mean everyone is switching, but it does mean the conversation has changed, and that's a powerful indicator of a deeper transformation. Looking ahead, the trajectory of this Phase 2 revolution will likely depend on a few key factors. Continued improvements in user experience will be critical. If Linux distributions can maintain their current momentum and keep reducing friction for new users, adoption will naturally grow. Hardware support must continue to improve, especially for laptops and consumer devices where users expect everything to work out of the box. And software availability, particularly in professional domains, will need to keep evolving, whether through native applications, compatibility layers, or cloud-based solutions. It's also worth considering the role of community, which has always been at the heart of Linux. Unlike proprietary systems driven primarily by corporate decisions, Linux evolves through collaboration, debate, and shared effort. This can be both a strength and a weakness. It allows for rapid innovation and diversity, but it can also lead to fragmentation and slower consensus. In Phase 2, finding the right balance between these forces will be crucial. So has the Linux revolution truly entered Phase 2? The evidence suggests that it has, but not in the explosive, overnight way that headlines might imply. This is a gradual, layered transformation, built on decades of work and now reaching a point where its impact is becoming visible to a much wider audience. It's less of a sudden breakthrough and more of a tipping point where all the incremental improvements, innovations, and shifts in perception start to add up. What makes this moment compelling isn't just what Linux can do today, but what it represents for the future of computing. It challenges the idea that operating systems must be controlled by a few dominant players. It offers a model where openness, collaboration, and user control are not just ideals but practical realities. And it shows that with enough time and effort, even the most entrenched ecosystems can be challenged in meaningful ways. In the end, Phase 2 of the Linux revolution isn't about declaring victory or predicting the end of other operating systems. It's about recognizing a shift in momentum, a change in what's possible, and an expansion of choice. Linux is no longer just the quiet engine behind the scenes. It's stepping into the spotlight, not as a replacement for everything else, but as a serious, credible option in a space that has long been dominated by a few familiar names. And that alone marks a significant turning point in the story of modern computing.